Last week, during his latest trial on charges of assisted suicide, Dr. Jack Kevorkian startled a Michigan courtroom when he stood up and shouted, "This is a lynching." Everyone turned to look, and sure enough, he just lynched some old guy. Gary Kasparov tied Deep Blue, the IBM supercomputer that can examine 200 million positions per second, in the fourth game of their 6-game series. Earlier in the week, Kasparov admitted he made a catastrophic blunder in Game 2 when he failed to force a draw by moving rook to E8. With all due respect to Mr. Kasparov, what the hell were you thinking?
Good morning. It's Friday, Policecraft Friday, January the 5th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have military shorts, motivational shorts, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, and Policecraft. All that and more when I get back.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Thank you. And now, the military shorts.
Why shouldn't we also have a law that says that any time a legislator or a congressman introduces a spending program, he has to introduce with it a tax program to pay for it. Then let the people find out. There was a woman from a financial firm that was back at the President's Economic Council, and this woman said that you go to the polls and you ask the people, do they want some social service, some program that government can give, and the people in the polls are apt to read and say, hey, that sounds good, yeah. But she says that isn't exactly accurate. She says put a $100 bill in each person's hand, and then show them the program and say, now, isn't that a nice program? Do you want it? Give me the $100. And she says, see what the poll says then, and how many people hang on to the $100 instead of the program.
In other words, if it's rather hidden and someone doesn't know exactly where it's going to come from.
All the government programs start $1 down, and we'll catch you later.
When the order was given to abandon ship, he was deep inside a darkened gun turret as the ship began to capsize. It was the early morning hours of December 7th, 1941, and Navy Seaman First Class James Ward and a dozen other crew members aboard the USS Oklahoma were in a race to escape the flooding turret. The 20-year-old Ward managed to find a flashlight, and he used it to illuminate an escape route for his turret mates, making sure each made it out safely. By the time the last had found their way out, Ward was completely submerged in water and perished. Just a day earlier, Ward, who had a promising professional baseball career before enlisting, was voted MVP of the Pacific Fleet Baseball League. For his heroics in sacrificing his life to save others, James Ward was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. In 2021, James Ward's remains were positively identified, and he was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery. He was the only enlisted Marine to be awarded both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross for heroism in combat. His name was John Basilone, and he was a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant who fought valiantly at both Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima, two of the bloodiest battles of World War II. During the battle for Henderson Field, with supply lines having been cut off, Basilone almost single-handedly held off a Japanese onslaught for 3 days, at one point with nothing more than a pistol and machete. It earned him the Medal of Honor, and he was sent stateside on a war bond campaign. But Basilone asked to be sent back to the Pacific, where he was on the initial landing at Iwo Jima in February 1945. It was there that he destroyed a Japanese garrison and aided a Marine tank trapped in the terrain before he was killed by shrapnel. John Basilone was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for his extraordinary heroism at Iwo, and he's buried in Arlington National Cemetery.
Those people told you for days in advance that if the university sought to go ahead with that construction, they were going to physically destroy the university. Now, why did you
negotiate many times?
Negotiate? What is to negotiate? What is...
The university is a public institution.
That's
it's
right.
Important institution
But the university...
for all of its own community and for the community of Berkeley that live around it.
All of it began the first time some of you who know better and are old enough to know better let young people think that they had the right to choose the laws they would obey as long as they were doing it in the name of social protest.
When the Libyan ruler Muammar Gaddafi declared the Gulf of Sidra as Libyan territory, he threatened to shoot down anyone who crossed it. But in August 1981, 2 U.S. F-14s and an SA-3A Viking crossed this so-called line of death, resulting in dramatic consequences. You see, for years, no one had dared to cross the line, even though it violated international boundary agreements. But on the morning of August 19th, the U.S. decided to test that line by flying an SA-3 well within Gaddafi's death zone, and they didn't have to wait long for a response. Soon after the unarmed SA-3 entered the contested area, 2 Libyan Su-22s began heading towards them. Lacking defensive systems, the SA-3 would have been a sitting duck if it weren't for 2 nearby F-14s, which engaged the Su-22s. After one of the Libyans fired a missile but missed, both F-14s then locked on and destroyed them with AIM-9 Sparrow missiles. The incident was one of many tense moments between the two nations.
Meet Edward Andrew Bennett. Amidst the chaos in Heckershire, Germany, Bennett and his company found themselves pinned down by relentless enemy fire. Bennett crawled across open ground under a hailstorm of bullets to flank the enemy position. Despite being spotted by the enemy, his determination was unyielding. He reached the safety of the trees and stealthily navigated his way to the rear of the enemy stronghold. With his trusty trench knife, he silenced a sentry on guard. Then, into the darkened house, he charged. A furious hand-to-hand struggle ensued in a room harboring 7 German soldiers. 3 fell to his rifle fire, another to a clubbing from his gun, and the final 3 met their end from his .45 caliber pistol. The fearless initiative, combat ability, and outstanding gallantry of Corporal Bennett turned the tide of battle, allowing the Americans to sweep all resistance from the town. Medal of Honor recipient Edward Andrew Bennett. This is his story.
My mother's a doctor, and she knows better than to ask a veteran who's been to combat if they've done anything. But we're having lunch. I've been home a short time, and she asked me. Now, she's a doctor, and the number 1 accidental cause of death in the United States is from prescriptions. So I asked her, have you killed anyone? And she got flustered. She got offended. You can't ask me that. I'm a doctor. Yeah. But prescriptions kill people. You may have prescribed something to somebody wrong. They may have died. And I said, how's it feel? She said, that's not good. Then why'd you ask me? But to tell you, when I got to Iraq as a gunnery sergeant, the best thing for me to do is not to be shooting at somebody, but to be on the radio, calling for artillery, air, support from whoever. Not to be sitting there, taking everybody out. And she listened to me, but they still don't believe you. They still look at you different.
He enlisted in the Army Air Force the day after Pearl Harbor, having just turned 18. He was assigned ball turret gunner on the Denellen, a B-17 in the 401st Bombardment Squadron operating out of Bassingbourn. He was Staff Sergeant Robert Ferris, and on December 20th, 1942, their B-17 was hit by anti-aircraft fire after a successful bombing raid on a German aircraft factory at Romilly-sur-Seine in France. Only 1 crew member survived the crash. The rest were declared killed in action. Their remains never positively identified or returned home. No closure, no final resting place, no peace for his family, only heartache. Then, in the fall of 2023, scientists from the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System were able to conclusively identify Sergeant Ferris, and after 80 years, he will be returning home to New Bern, North Carolina, where he will rest in eternal peace with his family. He made his film debut at the tender age of 3 and appeared in a dozen silent movies during his childhood. Both his parents were accomplished actors, and his acting career was beginning to take off when he decided to enlist in the Marine Corps 5 months before Pearl Harbor. His name was Brian Keith, and over 7 decades he would appear in more than 100 films and TV shows, earning a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Keith was a gunner on a SBD Douglas Dauntless dive bomber, where he flew bombing missions to Rabaul through the infamous Valley of Death. His career almost never came to pass, however, if not for some help from a Marine Corps legend. During one mission, Keith had 2 zeros hot on his tail when his gun overheated. Out of desperation, he shot double red flares at them, missing his target, but catching the attention of Pappy Boyington, who flamed 1 zero and chased off the other. The black sheep flew cover for us, Keith would say years later. They were our guardian angels.
And that was the military shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Matthew McConaughey.
I'm going to talk to you about some things I've learned in my journey. Most from experience, some of them I heard in passing. Many of them I'm still practicing, but all of them I do believe are true. Life is not easy. It is not. Don't try to make it that way. Life's not fair. It never was. It isn't now, and it won't ever be. Do not fall into the trap, the entitlement trap, of feeling like you're a victim. You are not. Get over it and get on with it. So the question that we've got to ask ourselves is what success is to us. What success is to you. Is it more money? That's fine. I got nothing against money. Maybe it's a healthy family. Maybe it's a happy marriage. Maybe it's to help others, to be famous, to be spiritually sound, to leave the world a little bit better place than you found it. Continue to ask yourself that question. Now, your answer may change over time, and that's fine. But do yourself this favor. Whatever your answer is, don't choose anything that will jeopardize your soul. Prioritize who you are, who you want to be, and don't spend time with anything that antagonizes your character. brave, take the hill, but first answer that question, what's my hill? So first, we have to define success for ourselves. And then we have to put in the work to maintain it. Take that daily tally. Tend our garden. Keep the things that are important to us in good shape. Where you are not is as important as where you are. It is just as important where we are not as it is where we are. Look, the first step that leads to our identity in life is usually not, I know who I am. I know who I am. That's not the first step. The first step is usually, I know who I am not. Process of elimination. Defining ourselves by what we are not is the first step that leads us to really knowing who we are. You know that group of friends that you hang out with that it really might not bring out the best in you? You know, they gossip too much or they're kind of shady. They really aren't going to be there for you in a pinch. Or how about that bar keep going to that we always seem to have the worst hangover? Or that computer screen, right? That computer screen that keeps giving us an excuse not to get out of the house and engage with the world and get some real human interaction. Or how about that food that we keep eating? Stuff that tastes so good going down, makes us feel like crap the next week. We feel lethargic, we keep putting on weight. Well, those people, those places, those things, stop giving them your time and energy. Just don't go there. I mean, put them down. And when you do this, when you do put them down, when you quit going there, when you quit giving them your time, you inadvertently find yourself spending more time and in more places that are healthy for you, that bring you more joy. Why? Because you just eliminated the who's, the where's, the what's, and the when's that were keeping you from your identity. Look, trust me, too many options, I promise you, too many options will make a tyrant of us all. All right, so get rid of the excess, the wasted time. Decrease your options. If you do this, you will have accidentally, almost innocently, put in front of you what is important to you by process of elimination. Knowing who we are is hard. It's hard. Give yourself a break. Eliminate who you are not first. You're going to find yourself where you need to be. Instead of creating outcomes that take from us, let's create more outcomes that pay us back, fill us up, keep your fire lit, turn you on for the most amount of time in your future. We try our best. We don't always do our best. Well, architecture is a verb as well. And since we are the architects of our own lives, let's study the habits, the practices, the routines that we have that lead to and feed our success, our joy, our honest pain, our laughter, our earned tears. Let's dissect that and give thanks for those things. And when we do that, guess what happens? We get better at them. And we have more to dissect. Be discerning. Choose it because you want it. Do it because you want to. We're going to make mistakes. You got to own them. And you got to make amends. And then you got to move on.
And that was Matthew McConaughey. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the 33 strategies of war.
And Jones felt part of that crusade, part of history. The most important reason for both Jones's and Latimer's willingness to work so hard, though, was that Johnson worked still harder. When Jones trudged into the office at 5 a.m, the lights would already be on, and Johnson would be hard at work. He was also the last to leave. He never asked his employees to do anything he wouldn't do himself. His energy was intense, boundless, and contagious. How could you let such a man down by working less hard than he did? Not only was Johnson relentlessly demanding, but his criticisms were often cruel. Occasionally, though, he would do Jones and Latimer some unexpected favor, or praise them for something they hadn't realized he had noticed. At moments like this, the two young men quickly forgot the many bitter moments in their work. For Johnson, they felt, they would go to the ends of the earth. And indeed, Johnson rose through the ranks, first winning influence within Clayburgh's office, then gaining the attention of President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. In 1935, Roosevelt named Johnson Texas State Director for the recently built National Youth Administration. Now, Johnson began to build a larger team around the core of his two devoted assistants. He also built loyalties and a scattering of others for whom he found jobs in Washington. The dynamic he had created with Jones and Latimer now repeated itself on a larger scale. Assistants competed for his attention, tried to please him, to meet his standards, to be worthy of him and of his causes. In 1937, when Congressman James Buchanan suddenly died, the seat for Texas's 10th district unexpectedly fell empty. Despite the incredible odds against him, he was still relatively unknown and way too young. Johnson decided to run and called in his chips. His carefully cultivated acolytes poured into Texas, becoming chauffeurs, canvassers, speechwriters, barbecue cooks, crowd entertainers, nurses, whatever the campaign needed. In the 6 short weeks of the race, Johnson's foot soldiers covered the length and breadth of the 10th district. And in front of them, at every step, was Johnson himself, campaigning as if his life depended on it. One by one, he and his team won over voters in every corner of the district. And finally, in one of the greatest upsets in any American political race, Johnson won the election. His later career, first as a senator, then as U.S. president, obscured the foundation of his first great success, the army of devoted and tireless followers that he had carefully built up over the previous 5 years. Interpretation. Lyndon Johnson was an intensely ambitious young man. He had neither money nor connections, but had something more valuable, an understanding of human psychology. To command influence in the world, you need a power base. And here, human beings, a devoted army of followers, are more valuable than money. They will do things for you that money cannot buy. That army is tricky to build. People are contradictory and defensive. Push them too hard and they resent you. Treat them well and they take you for granted. Johnson avoided those traps by making his staff want his approval. To do that, he led from the front. He worked harder than any of his staff, and his men saw him do it. Failing to match him would have made them feel guilty and selfish. A leader who works that hard stirs competitive instincts in his men, who do all they can to prove themselves worthier than their teammates. By showing how much of his own time and effort he was willing to sacrifice, Johnson earned their respect. Once he had that respect, criticism, even when harsh, became an effective motivator, making his followers feel they were disappointing him. At the same time, some kind act out of the blue would break down any ability to resist him. Understand, morale is contagious, and you, as leader, set the tone. Ask for sacrifices you won't make yourself, doing everything through assistance, and your troops grow lethargic and resentful. Act too nice, show too much concern for their well-being, and you drain the tension from their souls and create spoiled children who whine at the slightest pressure or request for more work. Personal example is the best way to set the proper tone and build morale. When your people see your devotion to the cause, they ingest your spirit of energy and self-sacrifice. A few timely criticisms here and there, and they will only try harder to please you, to live up to your high standards. Instead of having to push and pull your army, you will find them chasing after you. 3. In May of 218 BC, the great general Hannibal of Carthage in modern Tunisia embarked on a bold plan. He would lead an army through Spain, Gaul, and across the Alps into northern Italy. His goal was to defeat Rome's legions on their own soil, finally putting an end to Rome's expansionist policies. The Alps were a tremendous obstacle to military advance. In fact, the march of an army across the high mountains was unprecedented. Yet in December of that year, after much hardship, Hannibal reached northern Italy,
catching the Romans completely off guard and the region undefended. There was a price to pay, however. Of Hannibal's original 102,000 soldiers, a mere 26,000 survived, and they were exhausted, hungry, and demoralized. Worse, there was no time to rest. A Roman army was on its way and had already crossed the Po River, only a few miles from the Carthaginian camp. On the eve of his army's first battle with the fearsome Roman legions, Hannibal somehow had to bring his worn-out men alive. He decided to put on a show. Gathering his army together, he brought in a group of prisoners and told them that if they fought one another to the death in a gladiatorial contest, the victors would win freedom and a place in the Carthaginian army. The prisoners agreed, and Hannibal's soldiers were treated to hours of bloody entertainment, a great distraction from their troubles. When the fighting was over, Hannibal addressed his men. The contest had been so enjoyable, he said, because the prisoners had fought so intensely. That was partly because the weakest man grows fierce when losing means death. But there was another reason as well. They had the chance to join the Carthaginian army, to go from being abject prisoners to free soldiers fighting for a great cause, the defeat of the hated Romans. You soldiers, said Hannibal, are in exactly the same position. You face a much stronger enemy. You are many miles from home, on hostile territory, and you have nowhere to go. In a way, you are prisoners too. It is either freedom or slavery, victory or death. But fight as these men fought today, and you will prevail. The contest and speech got hold of Hannibal's soldiers, and the next day they fought with deadly ferocity and defeated the Romans. A series of victories against much larger Roman legions followed. Nearly 2 years later, the two sides met at Cannae. Before the battle, with the armies arrayed within sight of each other, the Carthaginians could see that they were hopelessly outnumbered, and fear passed through the ranks. Everyone went quiet. A Carthaginian officer named Gisco rode out in front of the men, taking in the Roman lines. Stopping before Hannibal, he remarked with a quaver in his voice on the disparity in numbers. "There is one thing, Gisco, that you have not noticed," Hannibal replied. "In all that great number of men opposite, there is not a single one whose name is Gisco." Gisco burst out laughing. So did those within hearing, and the joke passed through the ranks, breaking the tension. No, the Romans had no Gisco. Only the Carthaginians had Gisco, and only the Carthaginians had Hannibal. A leader who could joke at a moment like this had to feel supremely confident. And if the leader were Hannibal, that feeling was probably justified. Just as the troops had been swept with anxiety, now they were infected with self-assurance. At Cannae that day, in one of the most devastating victories in history, the Carthaginians crushed the Roman army. Interpretation. Hannibal was a master motivator of a rare kind. Where others would harangue their soldiers with speeches, he knew that to depend on words was to be in a sorry state. Words only hit the surface of a soldier, and a leader must grab his men's hearts, make their blood boil, get into their minds, alter their moods. Hannibal reached his soldiers' emotions indirectly by relaxing them, calming them, taking them outside their problems, and getting them to bond.
And that was the second part of Chapter 7 from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
What's the greatest sin? It's not lust. We tend to think that way, but it's not. And the great spiritual masters, the capital sin of capital sins is pride. Why? Because pride means I turn myself into God. Therefore, the greatest virtue is humility. When I lower myself in the presence of God, I open myself to the influence of God. Easy? Not last time I checked. We're all prideful. We all resist the path that's opened up to us by humility. But by following that path, we come to be healed.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, racism is the lowest, most crudely primitive form of collectivism. It is the notion of ascribing moral, social, or political significance to a man's genetic lineage. The notion that a man's intellectual and characterological traits are produced and transmitted by his internal body chemistry, which means, in practice, that a man is to be judged not by his own character and actions, but by the characters and actions of a collective of ancestors. Unquote. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of law and order.
It's not just the lawyer pushing for a deal, it's the brother too.
She admitted killing 2 people. She knew right from wrong. She wants to take a plea. Who are we to say no?
What if she was legally insane when she committed the crime? And what if after sitting in jail for a while, she decides she's not quite as sorry as she is right now? Do we really want to risk a reversal on appeal?
And there we go. So 2 things with this. He says when he comes out, he's one assistant district attorney. She's the other assistant district attorney. And this is a murder case that a woman who is on medication, she's psychotic and is on medication, just confessed to committing, that she was out of control, that she knew what she was doing. She knew what she was doing was wrong when she was murdering these people, and she wants 20 to life. And so, but no opposition to parole after 20 years. So he again says she's having some, Miss Rubirosa is having some objections here, or some doubts about this. But doubts without any reason to have any doubts. She's doubting just because in our culture, the left has convinced us that anything is possible. They've convinced us that nothing can be known with certainty, which is a contradiction and a lie. Because the fact of the matter is, not only is there certainty of knowledge, there's nothing but certainty of knowledge. He starts pointing it out, saying, hey, she confessed, she knew what she was doing was wrong. Why shouldn't we take the plea? And she, again, influenced by the left in this country, comes off not saying, if we allow an innocent woman to take a plea, that's wrong. That's immoral. That's what the character should have said. Now, the importance of this is again, is a popular television show, and it's all television shows like to reflect back what they believe the culture is in our country. Okay? So this is not something that you would have seen 50 years ago. The issue would have been about right and wrong and being certain rather than the skepticism that's being shown here. Back in a minute. Thank you. A little bit more of law and order.
Haas has a PhD in molecular biology from Columbia, a master's in organic chemistry from Stanford. She was a Fulbright scholar, a year at Oxford, followed by the Booth Chair in biology.
I didn't hear medical school on that list.
That's because she isn't a doctor, not an MD anyway.
Oh, she's treating cancer patients.
Technically, she's not practicing medicine. She calls what she does nutritional counseling. The Haas Institute is a for-profit business.
Let me guess. It's not regulated by the state.
We do our best to close down the quacks who promise a cure and sell overpriced carrot juice.
So why is Haas still in business?
Because she doesn't promise a cure. She says, I have an alternative.
And you let her slide because of her sales pitch?
We print up flyers, publish articles, publicize the issue on local TV. But as long as she doesn't hold her treatment out to be a cure for cancer, we can't do anything about her.
So anyways, what this is about is government rights. All the questions that they're asking is about government rights. Don't we have the right to shut her down, to shut this woman down? The government has no rights. And so you hear in that conversation, because it's a conversation between two detectives and a lady at the medical board, I guess. And so they're discussing there's a woman that this is a Law and Order, and so a woman has died ostensibly of breast cancer, but they found cyanide in her system, so they're thinking that there was some kind of Laetrile type treatment that was involved. And the lady that they're investigating was a lady that was giving nutritional counseling to the victim. And so her doctor, who the woman was seeing about breast cancer, is the one that actually recommended surgery and whatnot. And so the victim decided to go with this alternative medicine. So what you hear here is basically why haven't we shut her down? Why isn't she regulated, etc.? The problem with this is the government has no rights. They have no right to shut people down, run around shutting people down because they think that somebody is bad news. Is offering pipe dream. Let's put it that way. Offering a pipe dream. People have the right. I have the rights. The victim in this particular case has the rights, and she has the right to go out and spend her time, her money, her energy in any way she sees fit in regards to her treatment. If she wants to go to a voodoo specialist, that doesn't mean that the government and the voodooist may do his voodoo magic and she still dies. That doesn't mean the government should go in. It has the right to go in and shut down the voodoo practitioner. I have the right to see whoever it is I want. You have the right to see whoever you want. And in this particular episode of Law and Order, the victim had the right to see whoever it is that they want, and the government has nothing to say about it. Back in a minute. Thank you. I was listening to Maria Bartiromo, and I'm listening to one of the panelists when they're talking about the border make a mistake, a rhetorical mistake. Listen.
No, just common sense for 2 seconds. We have a country that's only a certain size. We cannot fit the entire 8 billion people that live on this planet in this country. Therefore, we must have some rules. If those rules are not followed and everyone can come, then you know what? That is going to happen in Chicago and it's going to happen in New York, where you have celebrities saying, my family isn't getting the aid and the public school funding isn't happening because all of this is being diverted to deal with this crisis at the border.
So, she's wrong here. And the reason she's wrong is she's taking a pragmatic approach. We should exclude people because we have a country of only a certain size. And so, therefore, first of all, she doesn't seem to understand the Democrats are not doing this because they want to provide safe haven for every hobo in the world. They're doing this because they need people to shore up Social Security. Okay, once you understand, they don't want to talk about it because then you end up having this big debate about Social Security. Why don't we do this or do that or do the other thing? They want to do it this way because they know that the other two basic options, either you cut the amount of money that people are receiving or you raise taxes, are not politically palatable. Of course, the sane thing to do is simply means test Social Security. If you're there's no reason that Donald Trump should get Social Security. There's no reason that Bloomberg should be getting Social Security. There's no reason for Bill Gates to get Social Security. Means test it. Okay? So, anyways, that's the reason. So when you understand that, Then you get into, we can have rational, sane discussions about how to save Social Security without creating further problems, without making our society more complicated and very possibly worse. Okay, so, but it's also about, what this is fundamentally about is property and property rights. Those are concepts. And pragmatism is about material things, about touchy-feely things you can touch with your hands that are tangible, or feeling as in emotions. So always make your best argument first. It's from a chess saying. In chess, they say always make your best move. Because if you make your second best move, third best move, eventually you're weakening your position, and eventually you're going to lose. Same thing goes here. If you're always making your second best arguments, you're eventually going to get swamped. Okay, because when you come out with the left and say, well, we don't have enough money, the left says, we'll raise taxes. Now what? You just stepped in it. If you say, well, we don't have enough room, well, we'll build it. We'll create new housing. We'll get up billions and billions of dollars, maybe trillions of dollars to create new housing. Now what? Okay, so always make your best move, which is conceptual, and that in this case it means property and property rights. They cannot win a property rights argument. So always make that move first. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, policecraft.
6. Special Operations. Sergeant Harrelson, you still want to work SWAT? Officer Sanchez, no, I just enjoy applying all the time. Samuel L. Jackson and Michelle Rodriguez, SWAT. The Tactical Enforcement Unit, otherwise known as SWAT, has a language all their own. They talk about disturbance resolution models, and they diagram wedge formations for crowd control, threat matrices, fatal funnels, deterrent zones, and they're constantly discussing the high ground and where it is and how to get there and how long you want to remain once you arrive. Just as impressive as their linguistic arsenal is their arsenal of weapons and gear, like explosive breaches and hinge-melting torches to get through doors, pole cameras to survey tight quarters, like attics, shotguns that shoot .40 caliber beanbags as a less lethal alternative to bullets, armored rescue vehicles with extension ladders and a door built into the undercarriage so you can enter a hot scene, position the rig right over the victim, and pull him in. The LRAD, long-range acoustic device, that targets a suspect with a beam of sound so piercingly irritating that it tends to make people just give up or try to find a dumpster to hide in to avoid the noise. Plus thigh holsters for handguns. All hail the thigh holster, which instantly transforms a SWAT cop from whatever he was previously into a bona fide badass. And then there's the almighty flashbang grenade. Most people's experience with flashbang grenades comes from the video game Call of Duty. Police tactical teams use the real deal. I spoke with Sergeant Tim O'Connor, a longtime member of SFPD's specialist team, who gave me the rundown. First used by British SAS troops in the late 70s, flashbangs are designed to temporarily disrupt an enemy's senses. They accomplish this by producing a blinding flash of light and an intensely loud bang of around 175 decibels, which causes temporary loss of hearing. The flash activates the photoreceptor cells in the target's eyes. This makes vision impossible for approximately 5 seconds until the eye can recalibrate, followed by a lingering afterimage that inhibits the target's ability to aim a weapon with any precision. The audible blast not only momentarily deafens, but also scrambles the fluid in the target's ears, causing sustained loss of balance and general screwed-upedness. Flashbangs are ideal for when a team is about to make a dynamic entry into a building or has eyes on an armed suspect that needs to be incapacitated to be safely taken into custody. But sometimes you pull the pin on the flashbang, and prior to throwing it, circumstances change dramatically such that now you shouldn't throw it. Maybe a small child enters the room, or the suspect surrenders. And there you are with the active flashbang in hand, and you gotta do something with it. Trying to put the pin back into a live flashbang is ill-advised, and this isn't a hot potato. You can't just toss it to a teammate. No, you have to absorb it, the proverbial falling on the grenade. This, Sergeant O'Connor informed me, is affectionately referred to as eating the bang. SFPD tactical teams drill on flashbangs every 6 months, with an orange traffic cone playing the part of the suspect. They give verbal commands, which of course the suspect does not obey because he's an orange cone. Then they pull the pin, toss the bang, and duck out of the way. After that begins the non-ducking portion of training, where someone has to eat the bang, all part of a rich police tradition of experiential learning. That selected someone cringes because he knows what's coming. Then he deploys the flashbang right next to himself, voluntarily entering the sound and light party from hell. This is all part of the SWAT philosophy of train, and train some more. Your average street officer qualifies at the range twice a year. SWAT gets on-duty range time twice a month. Some officers practice handgun reloads every night for an hour in front of their television, or get to the point where they can field strip their weapon with their eyes closed. They run on treadmills wearing ballistic vests and backpacks. And if you've ever wondered just who on earth works out with those gigantic tires you see at some gyms, rest assured, it's the SWAT guys. Whenever possible, SWAT maintains a good working relationship with the media. Because what you don't want at a high-intensity scene is some news station giving your location and setup away by filming it live and letting the suspects holed up inside the house watch the whole thing unfold on TV or their phones. Hey, look, there's the entry team approaching the front door. Let's greet them with gunfire. Media channels, by and large, respect this. They'll take footage of cops standing by their cars away from the action, and they'll film the aftermath, but nothing that would give away position or tactics. When the scene is safe and crowds have gone home, SWAT supervisors will hold a tactical debrief with the officers involved, where they'll talk about what went well and what went shitty. SWAT debriefs can be especially brutal because the team holds itself to high standards and there's not much room to screw up. So if someone made a mistake, a sergeant or team leader will tell them they fucked up, how the situation had to be unfucked, and how to avoid future such fuck-ups. These debriefs are often conducted with the understanding that rank is not an issue, which means that if a police officer thinks a sergeant is the one who blew it, he'll say as much. I speak my mind to the bosses, I once heard a TAC cop say. I just add sir at the end. The SWAT team has all sorts of tips for the common patrolman. They talk to you about having the proper combat mindset. They tell you never surrender ground you already own. They're the experts, and you'd be fools not to pay attention to them. But a handful of the suggestions seem a bit much, like the SWAT advice that you shouldn't wear white T-shirts under your uniform, because if you're in a low-light situation, that's exactly where the bad guy is going to aim, at that illuminated patch of white underneath your neck. But what about the older cops with white hair? Wouldn't that present a convenient target as well? Should they dye it? And how about those lucky ducks with pearly white teeth? Must they brown them with coffee stains? How far do we want to take this? One knock on SWAT you'll hear from patrol cops is that they're standoffish and aloof, and they all wear Oakley sunglasses. If you're not one of them, line officers will grumble, SWAT won't give you the time of day. This perception may be tied to the tight bonds forged on SWAT teams. You're talking about a group of officers of similar age, interests, and abilities on an elite unit who spend so many hours training together and so many hours hanging out off duty that after a while, they start to look and act the same. SWAT cops have to know and trust each other. When they're taking down the dope house, the guy in front hooks left because he knows, without anyone saying anything, that the guy behind him has got the right side covered. They're working operators taught to think on their feet. And yes, they do all wear Oakley sunglasses, but that's only because there's one guy on the unit who has a hookup, so he gets all of the guys the same sweet deal. There's an insularity that comes from such a work setting, and that's okay. You don't want a SWAT team to stop and make time for idle pleasantries and chit-chat with their patrol support at a critical scene, because there's a man with an assault rifle in that building, and if the team doesn't get this one right, some people are going to get shot, and some people are going to die. No, you want them to be terse and focused and say some technical shit to each other you don't fully understand as you stand aside to let them pass into the darkest valley. At a critical incident where a suspect is presenting an imminent, deadly threat, a special operations supervisor will, on occasions both rare and extreme, give the officers on scene what's known as a green light. This means the go-ahead to shoot the suspect on sight. A green light is only given when negotiations have failed, lives are at stake, and the suspect has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. The only time I'm aware of this order being given by the San Francisco Police Department was on May 9, 2012, when a homicide suspect named Dennis Hughes, wanted for the murder of his 66-year-old mother, shot at officers responding to his apartment at 861 Post Street. The units backed off and held the perimeter as Hughes remained inside, firing shots through walls and floors before he set fire to his own apartment, endangering everyone in his multi-unit complex as well as neighboring buildings. There was no talking with Hughes. He had decided his own fate and was trying to see how many people he could take with him. So the incident commander gave the green light, and when Hughes passed by a window, an SFPD sniper ended the standoff with a single bullet. That night is still painted in my mind. Streets were cordoned off and clogged with cops and firefighters, residents were being evacuated, and pedestrians were running away as they looked back over their shoulder like they do in disaster movies. There were 3 different police command posts, a media throng, and a sense in the air that anything could happen next. I remember going door to door evacuating tenants from an adjoining building and hearing shots ring out from an open stairwell and hitting the deck. I remember listening to the crackle of radio traffic, each update more impossible than the next. Now he's setting his apartment on fire? I recall being ordered to hold fast at the building's front door to accompany Hughes to the hospital and waiting there for some time because he never came out. The whole night was surreal, intense, cinematic, and I remember thinking that when the world ends, it might look a little something like this. The police command van was in place for the Hughes case. The van is a staple for any large, complicated scene, be it a criminal investigation or, more frequently, a large-scale festival where lots of coordination is needed. The command van is fairly sweet. It has a wall of television monitors and radio banks and tables with space to spread out maps and charts. It bristles with antennas. Seats come at a premium. Usually, it's just the brass in there, plus the one guy on the department who knows how to operate all the equipment. If you are a lowly patrolman, you may get a quick glimpse inside of how the other half lives, but then the door shuts, and you're like a passenger in coach straining to see what's happening in first class. If you are on, say, POTUS detail and are assigned to guard a street corner outside the president's hotel for 10 straight hours, you will yearn for the command van and the soft comforts it promises. Stood on your feet for hours on end recently? Around hour 5, your lower back already feels like it's been trampled by bison. The command van is air-conditioned. It has its own bathroom. There's a couch you can fully stretch out on, and when someone with a bunch of insignias on their collar does it, I think it's technically referred to as forward observation from a fixed post, but if you ask me, it looks suspiciously like lounging. There is a refrigerator that I have heard is stuffed with platters of cold cuts and flavorful beverages. You look tired, Commander. Would you care for a Snapple? Come recline over here so you can observe from a fixed post. And that's just the police command van. I can only imagine what the fire department command van looks like. Probably memory foam mattresses and oysters on the half shell. The media will report on high-profile incidents of what seem to be overzealous actions by police while serving search or arrest warrants. A SWAT unit stormed in, shot the family dog, terrified the children, or maybe used extreme force against a resident under questionable circumstances. And once in a great while, they do these things and it's the wrong damn house. If you're at all appreciative of the Bill of Rights, you may be deeply troubled by this. It's a given that the police have every right to make hard entry into a felonious residence because many of these homes present imminent danger. The vast majority of search and arrest warrants are served without a hitch, and officers I have worked with have time and time again shown heroic restraint in dealing with violent suspects during high-risk raids. But you may not ram down the door of the incorrect house any more than an air traffic controller may guide two 747s down the same runway at the same time. So you gotta do your homework. You are obligated to gather intel and conduct surveillance so you get it right. In the past, when doing the briefing for a search warrant, I've printed out large photographs of a duplex and written in large block letters, "This one," on the door of the target location and "Not this one" on the non-target, just as some paranoid patients will write on their limbs prior to undergoing surgery so the doctor doesn't carve up the right appendage when it's supposed to be the left. Because sometimes the upper unit holds the Newton boys, while downstairs is an assembly of Mennonites in a prayer circle. The Mennonites should remain undisturbed by you. Some SWAT units will insist that one of their officers physically touch the front door of the target location during the recon prior to executing a search warrant. This can cut down on mistakes and confusion when you actually hit the house. Is it a metal door with a wooden frame? A wooden door with a metal frame? Any sign of the door being reinforced? Is the walkway strewn with children's toys? The front yard dotted with gopher holes? You don't want your lead guy stepping in one and going down with a torn ACL. The answers to those questions will dictate everything from which breaching tool you'll use to how many officers will make up the approach team. Any discussion of special operations must include canines, a staple of the police department. Police dogs bring a lot to the table, not the least of which is their legendary sense of smell. Just how good is it? I asked Sergeant Davin Cole, a cheerful, loquacious 15-year canine handler, who told me you could put a grain of salt in a 10-gallon bucket of water and a dog would detect it. When Cole does presentations for school kids, he illustrates a dog's sense of smell as follows. Ever been home and smelled your mom making cookies in the kitchen? Smells good, doesn't it? Now how about if you go outside? Can you still smell them? Maybe, maybe not. How about if you go next door to a friend's house? Not likely. But a trained police dog can pick up that odor from 2 blocks away, and what's more, can break down the smell by ingredients: eggs, flour, sugar. Human beings have only a few square inches of membranes in their nose to detect scent. In contrast, dogs are working with a few feet of membranes because a canine's nose is like a honeycomb. The membranes just keep wrapping around themselves and trapping the scent for analysis. The longer the dog's nose, the better it smells. And one of the reasons bloodhounds are such legendary trackers is that they use their large ears close to the ground to, in effect, scoop up scents as they go. Trained police dogs can locate certain accelerants used in fires. Cadaver dogs pick up the chemical plume given off by decaying human remains. Cole told me that after a rash of sexual assaults in Amsterdam parks, dogs were specially trained to detect semen to help locate crime scenes when a woman was raped but couldn't say exactly where in the park the assault took place. Dogs can be trained to sniff out electronics like thumb drives and microcards, which aided in the prosecution of former subway pitchman Jared Fogle for possession of child pornography. Sheriff's deputies use prison dogs to find the silicon in contraband cell phones. But the main function of police dogs is to go after bad guys. Canines are specially trained to pursue, bite, and hold, although some departments train their dogs to bark and hold. Bite and hold canines will not release the suspect until commanded to do so by their handlers. Handlers give fair warning before any chomping goes on. They make a loud announcement to the suspect or to the area where they believe the suspect is hiding. The warning advises that a dog is going to be released and the suspect could get bit. If the suspect doesn't give himself up, then he has only himself to blame when the 100-pound missile launches his way. The warnings can compel a suspect to surrender because criminals fear dogs. They can't outrun them, can't bargain with them, can't reason with them. Dogs don't believe their excuses, tricks, or lies. The canines are trained to do two things and two things only, which is to find them and stop them. So sometimes even when a police dog isn't available, cops will get creative and try to fool the suspect into thinking otherwise. A veteran Chicago cop named Joe Wagner told me that when he was hunting for a suspect, he used to get a bullhorn and announce that a police dog was being released. He'd even make barking sounds so suspects would think a dog was hot on their tail and give up. I listened to Joe's bark imitation. It wasn't half bad. And it worked, he told me. Nobody wants to get bit. Police dogs aren't trained to bite only a certain area of the body because you never know which part of the suspect will be exposed, but they frequently go for forearms or legs. In bite training, handlers protect themselves with full bite suits, mixing up the colors so the dog doesn't get too used to going after only a certain shade.
And that was part 1 of Chapter 6, Special Operations, from Policecraft by Adam Plantinga. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.